Thanks for joining Veiled Mystic today as we examine the Norse god Vidarr. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy this video. Vidarr, the enigmatic Norse god of vengeance. The world of Norse mythology teems with larger-than-life gods, monsters, heroes, and tales of cataclysmic battles. Yet even in this spectacular pantheon, some figures stand apart in their obscurity and mystery. One such lesser-known god is Vidarr, the son of Odin and the giantess Grid. Buried in a handful of cryptic old passages, this elusive deity emerges as a quiet, wild-haired god who inhabits primeval forests. He silently bides his time until the fated final battle called Ragnarok, when he will vengeance his father against a certain murderous wolf. Unlike the bold war gods or Loki's chaotic trickeries, the outlier god Vidarr receives scarcely a mention in the Eddas and sagas, the main surviving texts of Norse myth. But the attributes and actions ascribed to him paint an intriguing, if hazy, portrait of a patient god dwelling apart from civilization amidst ancient woods and still lakes. When Ragnarok dawns at last in a world-engulfing battle, this overlooked god strides into action for his single magnificent, gory, and ultimately heroic deed. Then, his task complete, it seems Vidarr returns to the wildlands once more. Origins in fire and ash. As with much relating to him, the lineage around Vidarr appears somewhat murky compared to other Norse deities. Unlike the royal family bonds connecting Allfather Odin to mighty Thor or beautiful Freya, Vidarr claims a humbler origin tying back to primordial elements. As the poetic Edda records in the Völuspá or Prophecy of the Seeress, his mother was Grid, a frost giantess and personification of the icy earth itself. Some versions also suggest Grid was another guise or aspect of Frigg, Odin's shadowy wife. So here the king of the Aesir gods coupled with a chthonic goddess who embody the land, winter, and primal forces. This union speaks to Vidarr's later links with nature's fury and the enduring power of the earth. He would stand apart from vain gods and giants alike, a stoic outsider tied to wind, stone, bark, and soil. If Vidarr's lineage stretches back to foggy epochs when land first appeared from melting ice, fire and ash also feature prominently in his destiny. As the son of Odin, he seems forever fated to avenge his father's death amidst the conflagration of Ragnarok many eons later, when time itself burns away. Until then, the sagas spin mere fragments about this reserved god who wanders forgotten forests and mountains far from Asgard's halls. The silent god who waits. In an immortal realm of boasts, betrayals, murders, and plenty of drunken brawling, Vidarr's most defining trait proves to be his vow of silence and remote isolation from the other gods. While Odin travels the worlds forever hungry for wisdom and conquest, flashy Thor yearns for battles to prove his mighty hammer, and Loki hungers eternally for fresh pranks and clever thefts, Vidarr keeps his own counsel. The Eddic poems never show Vidarr feasting in Valhalla, roaming glittering Asgard, or even leaving his remote woodland realm. Instead, taciturn Vidarr dwells in a fortress or simple hut nestled in the deepest forests of Landvidi, surrounded by birch and evergreen trees. There he waits, silently biding his time through the long ages. He sharpens his weapons and broods over ancient rune letters while faceless servants tend to him. But what could inspire a god's self-imposed isolation from such a lively pantheon for eras on end? As Snorri Sturluson wrote in his 13th century prose Edda, Vidarr vowed silence following the Aesir's struggles against the vile wolf Fenrir, who grew rapidly into a gigantic monster no chains could bind. The war god Tyr even sacrificed his own hand to restrain Fenrir for a time. But all knew one day the beast would break free and hunt down the gods during Ragnarok. Seeing stalwart Tyr return bitter and maimed from his encounter, young Vidarr made his vow of silence until such time he could enact vengeance for these disgraces against the gods. Only then would he speak again and join his divine kin. And so the wrong son retreated to the forest folds around Landvidi's hills and lakes to bide his time, foster his rage, and prepare the weapons needed to fell beastly Fenrir once unleashed. For countless centuries Vidarr waited deaf to the laughter of wars, and amorous exploits of his peers waiting in Asgard's hall. He awaited only the sounding of grim Heimdall's horn heralding Ragnarok from the Bifrost Bridge, when his patient vengeance could at last be fulfilled. Unlike the bold war gods or Loki's chaotic trickeries, the outlier god Vidarr receives scarcely a mention in the Eddas and sagas, the main surviving texts of Norse myth. But the attributes and actions ascribed to him paint an intriguing, if hazy, portrait of a patient god dwelling apart from civilization amidst ancient woods and still lakes. When Ragnarok dawns at last in a world-engulfing battle, this overlooked god strides into action for his single magnificent, gory, and ultimately heroic deed. Then, his task complete, it seems Vidarr returns to the wildlands once more, Vidarr's fateful purpose foretold. While the surviving Norse legends show little concern with Vidarr brooding silently in his wilderness isolation, His important role amidst the fiery apocalypse of Ragnarok gets foreshadowed early on. Oracular Norse poems like the Völuspá describe Vidarr as a central hero whose destiny will change the fate of gods and the world itself. In the Völuspá's prophecy depicting vast ruin befalling the cosmos, foreboding lines proclaim how the wolf will swallow all Father Odin. Vidarr will avenge him. He will stab his sword into the beast's heart. So as with his father before him, Vidarr undergoes a profound fate. But where Odin once sacrificed himself on the great ash tree Yggdrasil to obtain forbidden runic wisdom, Vidarr here evolves to lose himself for epics in primeval forests only to later sacrifice himself in turn. His is a more fearsome baptism of blood and fire. Elsewhere, the Völuspá speaks vaguely of a powerful one emerging after righteous gods fall, who shall advance to fight the wolf. Surely this unnamed power can be none other than Vidarr, the silent watcher cloaked in mystery whose weapons and weaving shoes get described in the Gylfaginning section of Snorri's prose edited generations later. For while most Aesir and Vanir gods meet tragic fates during Ragnarok's fires, Vidarr's outcome shines as an ember of vengeance achieved and hope kindled anew. His mythic hour of destiny will irrevocably change the fate of the cosmos across unnumbered worlds. Not bad for a normally overlooked god who never speaks and keeps to the woods. His vengeance achieved amidst ruin. When Ragnarok finally descends across the realms with fire and icy storms, epic battles rage between gods defending their strongholds and gruesome giants, sea monsters, undead legions, and the terrifying wolf Fenrir leading the attack. As a being more ancient than the known heavens, wicked Fenrir bears a particularly vicious grudge against the gods for his long captivity. Now as Loki's monstrous son gorges himself on death and destruction, the dark fates of so many gods gets fulfilled. Mighty Odin faces the Fenris wolf alone, knowing the prophecy of his own demise. The Allfather god gives a great fight, gouging out one of the giant wolf's eyes before jaws snap and cranium cracks in the monster's fangs. Victorious Fenrir shakes free goblets of Odin's flesh to devour the king of Asgard whole. At this sight, silent Vidarr, watching events unfold through some enchanted pool or window, finally stands up from his seat amid the trees of Landvidi and takes up weapons for his long-awaited quest. As trees splinter and the Bifrost bridge crumbles amidst the fighting, Vidarr strides forth wearing a cloak of birch bark and bearing his father's own spear Gungnir as well as a bow with poisoned arrows. An odd shoe crafted from every kind of leather tops his foot. Thus armed for cosmic war at Earth's ending, Vidarr begins his final hunt for Fenrir with allies falling all around him. Dodging dragon's flames and undead claws, the god bounds across primordial forests and dried riverbeds towards Fenrir's laughing jaws. As the apocalyptic battle crashes on all sides, at last Vidarr spots his quarry and takes aim with his bow, launching an arrow straight into one massive yellow eye to half-blind the wolf. Roaring in fresh outrage, hissing Fenrir twists around seeking this new attacker. Slavering blood, Vidarr's namesake wide mouth opens impossibly huge to swallow this insolent archer whole like his eaten father. But Sylvan Vidarr expects such a move. As the wolf darts ahead, enormous fangs ready to snap down, the agile god jams his special shoe sideways into Fenrir's gaping maw. The hodgepodge leather strapcraft holds firm as granite between upper and lower long knife-like teeth. Fenrir thrashes wildly to dislodge the god now pinned halfway down his gullet, but the wedged shoe brace withstands every violence. Raising his father's mighty spear before the trapped wolf can recover, grim Vidarr drives Gungnir's steel-piercing tip through the roof of Fenrir's mouth straight into the dark heart beyond. He thrusts hard as if planting a holy tree to pin evil to the earth once more. The legendary spear shreds lungs and aorta both before erupting out the arched spine behind in a dark spray. Stone dead and beginning to smolder from within by such piercing magic, Fenris wolf immediately starts to collapse as Vidarr neatly steps back from those slackening jaws. Around the bloody Vidarr, mud volcanoes erupt and black waves crash o'er Midgard's broken lands. But Odin's son stands tall watching the bane of gods expire at his own hands and shoe. With Fenrir's death cries fading and the light leaving his remaining eye, Vidarr allows himself the first words his divine kin have heard in eons, a funerary prayer to his slain father whispered over smoking wolf flesh. His vow completes, Vidarr fades back towards Landvidi's surviving woods, silent as ever while the world tree Yggdrasil burns on into the deepening night. Thus through resilient calm and weapons forged across unfathomable years does Vidarr finally achieve his patient vengeance amidst Ragnarok's fires of doom. An enduring god for enduring lands. Although most mighty Norse gods and beasts end up dying alongside Fenrir in battle at Ragnarok, Vidarr's fate remains ambiguous in the unstable new cosmos arising from the flames. As a primordial being tied to forests, wild spaces, and soil, perhaps it seems fitting Vidarr would endure beyond the passing of mere worlds or dynasties of gods and giants. Hints scattered throughout the Edda suggest Vidarr and his brother the bright god Vali will survive Ragnarok's fires. Together they possess the strength and magic to restrain terrible Surt himself, lord of the ruinous fire giants who burned the original universe. Following such feats before an earth cooling from seas of lava, Vidarr then assists his kinsmen in ruling and repopulating the next unfolding world. Gods battle each other, but life itself continues. This strange resurrection of select gods who rebuild order from chaos has parallels to Vidarr's own mythic heritage as the child of Odin and Jord. Jord represented the personified earth, with Odin symbolizing culture, intellect, and the heavens impregnating quiescent nature. So like his parents before him across the cycles of creation, silent Vidarr quite literally emerges from Jord's wounded womb after Ragnarok as embodiment of land enduring and renewing itself through seasonal destruction and regrowth. No matter how severe the burning, forests and wild places eventually regrow. Perhaps Vidarr's survival and implied restoration activities reflect Norse cultural values of steadfastness, allowing communities to rebuild stronger after catastrophic setbacks such as famine, raids, volcanic winters, or plague. His equanimity and patience in the face of an utterly doomed world blazoned towards fiery oblivion overnight conveys a particular northern spirit of resigned toughness and determination against long odds that still champions action over apathy. In such late-stage Ragnarok scenarios where hope lay dead, Vidarr models the values and action necessary for survival amidst utter ruin. Unlike the scattered green shoots poking from under snowy blankets or black sands after merciless winters, renewal often germinates in unexpected ways from destruction's ashes. So while most Aesir gods defend their civilization and kingdoms to the bloody end in Norse myth, Vidarr wordlessly fights for older sacred promises symbolized in earth stone circles, forest groves, and the land itself. He quests not for glory but for the bitter justice of blood. When the fastness of gods can no longer hold against chaos and all burn together in the proverbial longhouse, only hoary Jord endures, from which folk like Vidarr can again emerge to kindle new fires without end. Behind the Norse pantheon's flashy hierarchy and politics stretches this deeper covenant between gods, giants, and the land itself as a source of life and the end of things. An obscure god crying out for recognition. Considering his vivid role in the Norse world's ending and rebirth, Vidarr's general obscurity in Eddic text seems rather puzzling. This silent avenger takes part in one of most dramatic and physically intimate mythic moments when he strides between Fenrir's jaws to slaughter the beast that slew his father. Yet for some reason Vidarr warranted little overt worship or even casual references compared to beloved gods like warrior Odin, thunderous Thor, or the psychopomp Maidenhel. Apart his spectacular cosmic deed, his long mystical isolation in the woods discouraged familiarity with humans. Hard to sacrifice goats or spin tales over meat fireside for a god who refuses visitors and never speaks. In a boisterous warrior culture like the ancient Norse celebrating deeds of courage in battle with much clashing of swords on shields, Vidarr's way of patient, cunning vengeance perhaps got overlooked as well. His sworn silence and enigmatic motivations invite little love compared to the bold, blood-soaked band of Aesir gods facing down doom alongside humanity. From Odin to Heimdall they embrace demise, gnashing teeth towards ravenous wolves and screeching valkyries. There are signs, however, that local Nordic cults may have paid Vidarr more homage in the primal forests, lakes, and land itself during the waves of folk migration sweeping down from Asia. Echoes of an older Vanir fertility substratum underpin some symbols and rituals later absorbed into Odinic worship as Norse raiders expanded south. In the Viking Age, Swedes and Geats were still sacrificing weapons into the waters and bogs long after Christianization began dismantling idols elsewhere. In dreams and trances, the chieftains would witness deities standing silent guard over such caches of swords or spear blades left among particular stones and trees growing alongside holy lakes. Terrible punishments awaited any foolish enough to steal such potent objects bound to the land and its enduring spirits. Many modern archaeological excavations around Scandinavia have indeed found ceremonial weapons carefully laid down in situ spirit graves. Maybe locals made quiet offerings seeking the god Vidarr's intercession for justice against terrible enemies or success sneaking through hostile lands. What need to invoke him loudly with Saxon churches and Frankish knights conducting hunts for witches and heretics on higher ground? Around the Baltic lakes, East Slavic cultures like the Vikings told midnight stories of forest demons called Leshy who haunted the pines wearing cloaks of human skin and carrying axes smeared in blood. They vengefully stalked any foolish or greedy enough to harm that sacred wood. Under green canopies aside the deep waters, who is to say offerings and stolen treasures never got discreetly buried at the foot of special trees for taciturn Old Norse gods wrapped in birch bark and watchful as wolves? Whatever the historical case, intriguing clues suggest this mute forest god Vidarr neighbored Slavic Lezi and Celtic Kernunos as one more manifestation of the brooding lord who metes out justice from wild places hidden in shadows beyond the village torch fires. But over centuries of gathering central authority in Scandinavia followed by the Reformation, The capricious old ways got suppressed hard from public view and recorded memory. Unlike the bold war gods or Loki's chaotic trickeries, the outlier god Vidarr receives scarcely a mention in the Eddas and sagas, the main surviving texts of Norse myth. But the attributes and actions ascribed to him paint an intriguing, if hazy, portrait of a patient god dwelling apart from civilization amidst ancient woods and still lakes. When Ragnarok dawns at last in a world-engulfing battle, this overlooked god strides into action for his single magnificent, gory, and ultimately heroic deed. Then, his task complete, it seems Vidarr returns to the wilderlands once more, an enduring god for enduring lands. Although most mighty Norse gods and beasts end up dying alongside Fenrir in battle at Ragnarok, Vidarr's fate remains ambiguous in the unstable new cosmos arising from the flames. As a primordial being tied to forests, wild spaces, and soil, perhaps it seems fitting Vidarr would endure beyond the passing of mere worlds or dynasties of gods and giants. Hints scattered throughout the Eddas suggest Vidarr and his brother the bright god Vali will survive Ragnarok's fires. Together they possess the strength and magic to restrain terrible Surt himself, lord of the ruinous fired giants who burned the original universe. Following such feats before an earth cooling from seas of lava, Vidarr then assists his kinsmen in ruling and repopulating the next unfolding world. Gods battle each other, but life itself continues. This strange resurrection of select gods who rebuild order from chaos has parallels to Vidarr's own mythic heritage as the child of Odin and Jord. Jord represented the personified earth, with Odin symbolizing culture, intellect, and the heavens impregnating quiescent nature. So like his parents before him across the cycles of creation, silent Vidarr quite literally emerges from Jord's wounded womb after Ragnarok as embodiment of land enduring and renewing itself through seasonal destruction and regrowth. No matter how severe the burning, forests and wild places eventually regrow. Perhaps Vidarr's survival and implied restoration activities reflect Norse cultural values of steadfastness, allowing communities to rebuild stronger after catastrophic setbacks such as famine, raids, volcanic winters, or plague. His equanimity and patience in the face of an utterly doomed world blazoned towards fiery oblivion overnight conveys a particular northern spirit of resigned toughness and determination against long odds that still champions action over apathy. In such late-stage Ragnarok scenarios where hope lays dead, Vidarr models the values and action necessary for survival amidst utter ruin. And like the scattered green shoots poking from under snowy blankets or black sands after merciless winters, renewal often germinates in unexpected ways from destruction's ashes. So while most Aesir gods defend their civilization and kingdoms to the bloody end in Norse myth, Vidarr wordlessly fights for older sacred promises symbolized in earth stone circles, forest groves, and the land itself. He quests not for glory but for the bitter justice of blood. When the fastness of gods can no longer hold against chaos and all burn together in the proverbial longhouse, only hoary Jord endures, from which folk like Vidarr can again emerge to kindle new fires without end. Behind the Norse pantheon's flashy hierarchy and politics stretches this deeper covenant between gods, giants, and the land itself as a source of life and the end of things. Modern reverberations of a timeless god. The rare references to Vidarr in Norse literature largely faded following the medieval period as Christianity dominated Scandinavia. But with renewed modern interest in ancient myths and legends, this vengeful god has seen minor resurgences in various forms. Resurrection in comics and popular media. Vidarr appears as a character in Marvel's Thor comic series, usually depicted as a powerful outsider god aligned with Thor against various threats. Vidarr also gets referenced in Japanese manga, video games, and Viking historical fiction drawing upon Norse legendary material. These tend to envision him as a rugged, formidable deity waiting in the wings. Homages in heavy metal music. Since the 1970s, various metal and pagan folk music acts have paid homage to Vidarr as a symbol of wildness and resistance to tyranny. Bands such as Amon Amarth, Rebellion, and Falkenbach have produced albums or tracks referencing Vidarr's oath of silence and his apocalyptic fight with Fenrir at Ragnarok. These groups admire his embodiment of fearless opposition to monstrous forces. Interest in neo-pagan traditions. Just as Germanic neo-pagan groups have resurrected reverence for Norse gods like Odin and Skadi, a few fringe Nordic sects now also pay respect to the solitary Vidarr. As ecological consciousness and anti-authoritarian sentiment grows, Vidarr's associations with wilderness survival and defiance of oppressive powers offer symbolic attraction. Some neo-pagans uphold his mythic vengeance quest as metaphor for resisting society's destructive forces. Ominous fascist appropriations. Unfortunately, the character of Vidarr has also undergone questionable or malicious appropriations. Since the 1990s, a handful of far-right hate groups and neo-fascist occultists have latched onto Vidarr's legends as apparent justification for ecological destruction, racism, and purging perceived civilizational threats. These extremists see his violent mythic role as validation to combat progressivism and minorities. Such fascist affiliations now cast Vidarr in a disturbing light as icons get hijacked to serve totalitarian agendas evoking past Nazi flirtations with Norse myth. So while still a relatively obscure Norse deity, Vidarr's unique symbolic values, wilderness attributes, and deity transitional role at Ragnarok continue to inspire artistic interpretation and even some disturbing appropriation centuries after falling into obscurity. As society grapples with authoritarians manipulating cultural icons for malicious ends, the silent god's legacy faces uncertain horizons. Yet it seems fitting this enigmatic god who dwells in legend's shadows between the civilized realm of gods and chaotic giants should share in similar liminal zones today, waiting silently beyond familiar cultural boundaries. Vidarr stands ready to emerge for his foretold vengeance yet again when the need demands it. And Ragnarok takes many forms across human eras. Wherever oppression, hubris, and monstrous injustice rear up, this watchful Norse icon embodied in the land itself seems poised to renew his ancient compact with a struggling world. For the scattered bands of Germanic pagans centuries ago making offerings at special groves and bogs in northern lands, continuity and redemption shown as ever possible following the harshest devastations. Like scattered seedlings sprouting after the wildfire passes, hope endures wrapped up inside Vidarr's cloaks of birch bark, iron shoes, and silently raised spear. And as Allfather Odin himself learned in sacrificing an eye and hanging himself on Yggdrasil's gallows tree, only from utter destruction can creation wholly begin again.